In Russian-occupied Ukraine, there is currently this private terrorist group which was recently fighting with its Russian state-led terrorist comrades. They are called the Wagner Private Military Company, or simply the Wagner Group. Even if you've been following the tragedy unfolding in Ukraine quite closely, you might be confused right now. After all, in English media, we spell it like this. So Anglo-Americans often will call it Wagner, while Anglo-Brits call it Wagner because people naturally sound out the letters and pronounce the word how their accent dictates. You see, the group was named after a German composer called Wilhelm Richard Wagner, appropriately, one of Hitler's favorite composers. You've certainly heard his music at one point or another. In Russian, the name is appropriately transliterated as Wagner, but because it is a proper German noun and German ostensibly uses the same Latin alphabet as us, we use the German spelling Wagner, even though it inevitably produces improper pronunciation. So often when I hear Anglo journalists pronouncing the name of this Wagner group, I get intuitively annoyed. Why can't these stupid fucking Anglos just learn the proper pronunciation? I ask myself. Let us be fair, however, and try to imagine ourselves in their position. Then perhaps we will judge them with more lenience. These Anglo journalists, after all, primarily study war and the other interactions of different states. Why should we expect them to know anything about German pronunciation or classical music? What of their audience, to whom they hope to communicate the facts of the situation? Should they be expected to know anything more about these ancillary subjects, so as to recognize that the Wagner Group is this same Wagner Group they've been reading about? You see, the real problem here isn't that some people don't know the proper pronunciation. It's that we have this bizarre dedication to keeping the spelling unchanged so long as it's in the Latin alphabet.
After all, why do we transliterate? Why don't we just call the group Cheveka Wagner like the Russians? Why don't you ever just read the Chinese characters for, say, Beijing? This is because the writing system for English isn't simply composed of symbols for entire words or concepts. Instead, our writing system is composed of various letters which represent different sounds. Therefore, we rewrite foreign words so that we can read it out with some degree of accuracy. For instance, if I saw this in English media, I'm bound to be confused because I don't know the Arabic script, but if you transliterate it, I know that that's Muhammad, a popular Arabic first name, which corresponds with the Prophet of Islam. To show how transliteration functions when it is used, let's look at the president of Ukraine, or more specifically, his name. In Ukrainian, it's spelled and pronounced Volodymyr Zelensky. Although you're probably familiar with the pronunciation, the spelling is likely new and strange, because obviously we don't simply print the Cyrillic script in English media. Instead, we once again write it out to achieve a vernacular Latinized equivalent, which allows us to approach native pronunciation by sounding the name out using our own script. Thus, in English media, we often see the name of the Ukrainian president spelled Volodymyr Zelensky. But this is not the consistent, regular Latinization of the name because each language pronounces the Latin alphabet a tad differently. In German media, you'll see this spelling, Volodymyr Zelensky. I personally find this spelling incredibly disturbing and utterly revolting. However, if you know the German variant of the Latin alphabet, you know that this is a perfectly accurate transliteration which most closely approaches the Ukrainian pronunciation. And for that matter, the English pronunciation as well.
However, whenever a word is natively written in the Latin alphabet, we lose all desire to transliterate, even though no Anglo will intuitively sound it out correctly with any degree of accuracy. I've been speaking of German, but there is a common failure to transliterate words from other more foreign languages that use some variant of the Latin alphabet, such as Polish, Hungarian, or Turkish, into English for the same reason. It's just the Latin alphabet, so we should understand it fine. The problem is that, because these languages use such different pronunciation rules, the Latin alphabet isn't being used as a phonetic script here, serving simultaneously as both a symbol and a pronunciation guide, but rather as a mere symbol.
In a sense, this rose from a sort of old-world elitism. All readers should know French and Latin, and often did in pre-modern Europe, and only the contemptibly uneducated rabble wouldn't. So why should the writer ever lower himself to satisfy such ignoramuses? And if some idiot somehow does read a book, and mispronounces my beloved gobbledygook. That's just a useful sign that they aren't worthy of an invitation to Sir Wiggins' soiree. Even today, I'll often find lines from these revolting languages with neither translation nor explanation printed in academic writing, because thus floweth the elitist culture of academia.
But none of this is inevitable. The incoherence caused by these problems of transliteration, or lack thereof, are all the result of stupid-ass decisions we've made and continue to make as a society. There's another, better I'd argue, path, and we can find this in the strategy adopted by speakers of the Russian and Ukrainian languages. I remember reading an article somewhat recently about the trip that President Zelensky took to The Hague. To all those who were there, he remarked that they would all prefer to see another Vladimir in The Hague, referring to Vladimir Putin. This perplexed me at the time. I was well aware that the name Volodymyr was effectively the Ukrainian equivalent of Vladimir. Still, I thought it strange that a Ukrainian would so readily mark an equivalence between the two. After all, the Hispanic name Juan is basically the equivalent of the English name John, but unless you live in the linguistics department, you're unlikely to acknowledge that equivalence, even for the sake of humor. But Russians and Ukrainians are both well aware of and openly acknowledge the equivalence of their various names for things. For instance, the capital of Ukraine is called Kiev in Russian, but Kyiv in Ukrainian. These languages, even though they both utilize a variant of Cyrillic, use very different spellings and even pronunciations for the name of the same thing, and that's okay. In an increasingly interconnected, diverse world, we must accept that different cultures will spell things their own way to adapt to their own pronunciation patterns, and stupid-ass rules inhibiting this only make communication more difficult.
If you'd like to know more about the society in which we live, and why Garfield made it so, watch this video next. Godspeed, gamers.